Hey everybody, it's Party Elite, and today we're taking a look at a very exciting upcoming medieval city builder slash RTS, Manor Lords. I'd had my eye on it earlier this year, but a new trailer as well as the game being made available on Steam for wishlisting and the pending early access release have got me extremely excited. And I thought I'd give this potential indie gem a little spotlight video nice and early because there's already so much to talk about. I've said in the past I'd like to highlight games like this more often on the channel, so if you'd like to see more content like this, don't hesitate to let me know down below. As always, your feedback makes a world of difference. First things first, we're going to take a look at the newly released trailer, then we're going to dive on into some of the details. Alright, so right off the bat, I don't think I need to say it, but I will anyway, the game looks absolutely beautiful. Using photogrammetry, the developer is able to get textures and materials looking mind-blowingly realistic, and photogrammetry, just so you know, it's a process of taking pictures of an object from multiple angles and using that imagery to build the actual asset and the materials on it. And between the Quixel Megascan library and some handmade work as well, the results are immediately visible. The natural environment looks breathtaking as well, and the animations are being motion captured, presumably especially so for combat. And the destruction simulations are being built using Houdini, a simulation software used by many AAA devs, but also in the film and TV industry. On top of that, what little we've seen of the user interface is also really quite nice. From the static visuals to how things are animated, it all just feels very, very polished heading into early access. And yes, while graphics aren't the most important thing, I'd be lying if I didn't say these visuals make a very good first impression with regards to the level of fidelity and polish the developer seems to be aiming for across the board. From the level of detail in how buildings get built with scaffolding and everything, to how clouds form and dissipate, to being able to watch hunters go through the entire process of obtaining meat, the developer is trying to hit high notes again, just across the board. That being the case, let's start digging into the meat of this project. A lot of the information I'm going to talk about is collected from across a variety of platforms. The developer has an active Instagram account, Twitter account, a less active Facebook, and is also seemingly going to be active on their own subreddit. So there's a lot to get from a lot of angles, and I'm going to try and collect that all for you here today. Now, without an actual timeline to lock it in place, the game takes inspiration from European history between the 11th and 15th century, pursuing a degree of realism both in its history as well as its mechanics. The standard tropes of a city-building game are all there, as can be expected. You plot out streets and buildings, you manage your growing population, you build hopefully sustainable supply chains, etc., etc. But Manor Lords seems to be taking all of these tropes and injecting them with a dose of medieval steroids, pulling together ideas that we've seen executed separately in different games before, and then also adding some fresh ideas of its own into the mix. Right at its core, as a city builder, you can see a rather organic system of plotting roads and buildings. As I've touched on previously in other videos, the medieval era and heck, even the modern era uses city planning not just as a means of organizing the flow of traffic, but also as a system of defense in the worst case scenario. This easy organic city planning lends itself not just to historical accuracy then, but potentially also to a strategic layer within the game, planning for said worst case scenario. And while peasants don't need roads to get from place to place, they move more efficiently on roads, and merchants can only move on roads to get from place to place. Buildings are plotted down as can be expected, but again, they're not just popped magically into place, and instead, they need to be built over time, collecting all the raw materials and getting people to actually work the construction site. As with many city builders, you'll want to consider the proximity of certain building types to other building types, and we can see similar things here, once again, being taken up a notch. For example, the well, while necessary for getting water to the people, will deplete fertility in the area, making it less viable for farming. That's a great way to represent groundwater table depletion, which is, I don't think, something I've ever seen represented in a city builder, even though it's a pretty important thing to consider. Now, presumably, taking from the land in other forms, such as harvesting trees, will also have an actual impact on the environment, and it's going to be what ultimately forces you to expand into neighboring regions. This screen here implies that you expand your holdings over time using influence, and from my understanding, other AI players will be developing their holdings on the same map in real time. Now, I might be mistaken here, so take this with a grain of salt, but from my understanding, and from what we're seeing on screen over here, it seems like the battles that take place in this game aren't from some randomly spawning raiders that show up from some non-specific place that you can't ever strike back at. No, these are other kingdoms, or perhaps other dukedoms or counties or baronies or whatever. More on that in a bit. Let's stick to city building talk for now. Now, seasons are seemingly already implemented, and as this footage shows us the first snowfall of the year, the text with it implies that winter scarcity is something to consider. I imagine this would not only make an impact to herbs, but also for the purposes of hunting and farming. Here we see a farmer plowing away in the sun, and later in the rain. The developer has suggested that weather will affect aesthetics as well as behavior. Presumably some things will be less efficient in poor conditions. A change of seasons might also bring with it the need for managing heat. That and cooking are probably the two main reasons we see charcoal kilns as a building option as well, and changing seasons also typically means the need for crop rotation or sourcing food from alternative methods. Hunting was already touched upon, but animal migration should impact that if the game is going that far, which is perhaps why we're already seeing the implementation of shepherd huts as a source of wool and probably meat, and chicken coops as a source of more food. We've also seen an apiary, with the associated text implying not just a source of honey, but also a source of candles. Now, could this be a complex trade good? On which note, we already spoke of the merchants that come and go using the roads, but we've also been shown market stalls. It's very possible that villagers and merchants interact with each other at these stalls all on their own, perhaps with rules that you've set as the local lord, but is the marketplace also a central distribution hub for goods within your city as well? Peasants needing to travel to the local market to buy their food and clothes and more just makes sense, and again, it's interesting to see how far that goes. Will they be buying candles for their home? Will they be buying charcoal to cook with? Will the production of certain materials require other materials, and will those materials be bought from marketplaces, or will they be picked up from where they're produced, or from a central warehouse? There's lots of potential, and seeing how far the developer is already pushing quote-unquote simple things, I'm curious to see how they approach this. Now, back to the marketplaces, we see all sorts of potential trade goods. The wool I touched on earlier, to hides from hunted animals that have gone through the tanning process, to the aforementioned candles, to who knows what else. And when it comes to moving all these goods from place to place, Will we need to manage all the nuance there as well, building the carriages and domesticating the animals as needed? Now, the developer has already mentioned that they want to explore cavalry after the early access launch. It's not in the base game at early access, but how great would it be if you had to manage the stables and raise the horses and choose between workhorses and war horses? And not just that, but I can't wait to see how far manufacturing for military purposes is pushed. Will it all just fall generically under a single blacksmith building? I have my doubts, again, given the level of detail elsewhere. A bowyer might need to turn wood into bows, while a fletcher probably prepares the arrows. A tanner probably helps prepare padded leather and gloves and the like, while a proper armorer is needed for chainmail and plate, and a weaponsmith needs to make swords and halberds and spears and who knows what else. And how will recruitment work? Will you be able to raise levies based on the materials and population you have available? It looks as though you can actually mix and match equipment, which is what I'd hope for. See, these unarmored archers seem to be fighting side by side with archers covered in leather padding. And here we see what appears to be leather coif versus metal helms and leather padding versus chainmail, except it's inconsistent. So one person has a helm and chainmail, but another person just has the helm and padding, and maybe I'm looking into this too much, but this kind of stuff gets me really excited. It's a nice level of detail that is often lacking in AAA titles, but it's a very realistic detail. And if this is a reflection of the materials you have compared to the types of troops you need, will losing those materials and losing those troops directly impact your efficiency back at home? Population dropping and losing equipment on the field of battle? Or perhaps getting prisoners and looting equipment that you can smelt and repurpose? Now, beyond all that, the RTS controls look fantastic, even what little we've seen, with things having a very Total War style vibe to them. We can see rank and file being adjusted, and we can see a variety of unit types as well. The level of detail on the units is great. You can see their armor is very nicely modeled. You can see, blood and things like that. It is really quite intense how much the game is showing going into early access already. And again, the battles that we've seen seem rather small scale, but I imagine that's a reflection of the population back at home, back at the cities that are being built, and how much of it can be sacrificed to go into war. Again, another layer of consideration that a lot of these games kind of gloss over. Now, on the topic of battles, I'm sure at least one of you who's watching is thinking, will there be multiplayer? The developer has already gone forth and said that multiplayer is not in the books for early access, but it is something that they are considering. So, not right at the beginning, but I'm sure with enough support, multiplayer just seems like a natural fit. And in a similar vein, castles and sieges aren't planned for the game at its early access launch either, but it is under consideration as well. This is very interesting to me too, because historically a lot of sieges are more about survival than epic battles. Are you going to try and, sneak food in and out if you're under siege, or if you're the attacker, are you going to be given a slew of new building options to build siege towers, to put together ladders? If you're defending your castle, will you have oil you can toss or rocks you can toss? There's so much potential. And again, the level of detail the developer is already showing us going into early access has got me just dreaming. But we'll see how it all turns out. But I am super excited to hear these conversations and to just keep up with the developer. I can't think of the last time I saw fighting done well in a city builder, so I am particularly intrigued by this blend. And I'm also very intrigued, actually, by the polar opposite of the warring, the diplomacy. The diplomacy system the dev has shown is unlike, again, anything I've ever seen before, relying on written letters, putting together phrases from a collection of phrases you have access to build your missives. Based on the phrases you choose to go with, your message will have a variety of potential outcomes, with more phrases being unlocked over time through gameplay. Again, just what a completely different approach to something that could be very mundane otherwise. From supply chain management, to meeting the needs of your people, to leading them to war or prosperity, Manor Lords is looking absolutely top-notch, both literally in terms of visuals and otherwise in terms of systems and mechanics. The developer is clearly very serious and passionate about this project, and the extreme level of activity on social media and everything is promising for sure. That level of passion being poured into a project makes me passionate about the project, so if you want to see more coverage of the game, you can rest assured there will be plenty of it on this channel. Rarely have I seen this much potential with such lofty goals, so I've got all eyes on Manor Lords. If you'd like to keep up with this and other strategy gaming content, make sure you subscribe to the channel as well. I hope you enjoyed this little spotlight on an exciting upcoming game, and if you did or didn't, let me know down below with likes, comments, or otherwise. As always, a massive thanks goes out to all of my channel members and patrons for supporting the channel on a monthly basis, and a big old thanks goes out to each and every one of you for watching. Until next time, cheers.